News of a breakthrough brings hope for health and freedom from a disease that forces strict routines of diet and lifestyle. It involves removing islet cells from donor pancreases, which are then injected into diabetics, with the help of anti-rejection drugs called immunosuppressants. The cells bond with the diabetic's pancreas and begin producing insulin. The University of Alberta team, headed by Drs. James Shapiro and Jonathan Lakey, have performed the procedure on 14 patients so far, and each one has been a success. Bob Teskey is patient number 4. He received new islet cells more than a year ago.
You really do function as a normal, non-diabetic. And that's really quite remarkable when you've been juggling these balls, juggling all of these issues for as long as I had.
When I was 14 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Now, instead of juggling diet, exercise, and insulin, he manages a rigorous schedule of speaking engagements, interviews, and meetings, all to support a procedure that changed his life.
I just urge you to keep adding to that support. Thank you.
Success stories help raise money, and the diabetes researchers are taking their pitch directly to the Prime Minister. While the federal government contributed to some of the initial research, there's been no money to pay for transplants, at least not from the Canadian government. U.S. President Bill Clinton has committed $5 million.
That's the truth.
It's enough to pay for 40 islet cell transplants, but only 4 of them in Canada. Most of the money is to set up programs expanding the Canadian research to 6 U.S. and 3 European cities. The better-funded American programs are already outpacing the Canadian team. The head of the program says money is a big problem.
We have about 400 to 500 patients being urgently worked up right now by our coordinators and team. We have several thousand patients requesting this treatment right across Canada, and of course many thousands more across the world. If we're able to offer that treatment to them, we do need urgent help.
Help, not just for transplants, but for research.
To me, we're not there yet. There's still some work ahead of us.
The work is finding a better way of getting islet cells. There aren't enough organ donors to meet the demand, and the cells that are being transplanted could be rejected by the recipient's immune system. That's why they need immunosuppressant drugs.
These drugs are preventing the body from rejecting the tissue. They also potentially could put their patients at risk. Over time, if we transplant enough patients, we're going to start to see problems in that.
The potential complications that could come with the anti-rejection drugs that are still needing to be used would be too great a risk for me to consider.
Marcia Lee has decided that as a healthy diabetic, it's too early to consider the transplant. Research is now focused on growing islet cells that won't come from organ donors and won't need anti-rejection drugs. That's the next breakthrough diabetics and researchers are hoping for. A discovery that can finally be called a cure. Terry Reith, CBC News, Edmonton.
After the break, a new system of tracking diabetes in Canada. And later, a surprising study on the potential benefits of liposuction. You're watching Health Matters on CBC Newsworld.
Diabetes is one of the most common causes of significant illness and complication in Canada. Who should be tested for this difficult and challenging disease? Well, essentially anyone who has a family history of diabetes, either adult onset or insulin dependent, should be tested, certainly in their early 30s to 40s. Any mother who's had gestational diabetes, in other words, who's had their sugars rise during pregnancy, needs to be followed very aggressively. And anyone who shows symptoms or signs of diabetes, which includes fatigue, insomnia, increased amount of urination, increased need to drink, increased number of infections, should be screened for diabetes. The earlier time we find the disease, the better chance we have to treat it and prevent any long-term complications.
Closed captioning is brought to you by RX&D, Canada's research-based pharmaceutical.
Confused by the different forms of diabetes? There are 3 types. Type 1 diabetics don't make insulin. It's an autoimmune disorder. That means for some reason their bodies attack the cells that make insulin. Type 1s need insulin injections to survive. 90% of diabetics have type 2 diabetes. The pancreas still makes insulin, but the body can't use it properly. It usually hits people over 45 and people who are overweight. Up to 4% of pregnant women develop gestational diabetes. It's a temporary condition, but 40% of the women who get it will develop type 2 diabetes later in life. Diabetes researchers are starting work on a new national surveillance system. It's a way of tracking a disease that affects more than 2 million Canadians. Nobody knows exactly how widespread the problem is because until now there hasn't been a surveillance system. Yvonne Colbert now on why accurate numbers are so important and who they could help.
Gabby, pass it.
8-year-old Jenna Maynard is one of an estimated 2 million Canadians with diabetes.
The primary symptom is thirst, constant. I mean, she would sit down at a meal and drink 5 or 6 glasses of whatever you give her.
And we usually keep my insulin right in here.
Jenna was diagnosed earlier this year with type 1 diabetes, caused by a malfunction of her immune system. There is no cure, and she'll need insulin for the rest of her life.
Having diabetes isn't fun, but once you've got it, once you get it for a while, you get pretty used to it.
And lots of Canadians are going to have to do just that. There's nothing Jenna could have done to prevent her type 1 diabetes, but she's in the minority. An estimated 90% of Canadians with diabetes have type 2, which is linked to poor eating, lack of exercise, and obesity.
We anticipate that it could double over the next 25 years.
But hard data on diabetes is limited. Until now, Canadians have had to rely on information gleaned from American studies, like the one conducted by Dr. Frank Vinocour. He looked at diabetes in the United States from 1990 to 98. His study found a 33% increase in the disease, but it also found more.
What we're seeing is the greatest increase in people who are 25, 30, and 35. So not only more people with diabetes, but coming on at a younger age.
That means the possibility of more complications. People with diabetes often die from heart disease or stroke. They go blind, their kidneys fail, and they need amputations.
These are all, for the most part, preventable with much of the medicine and treatment regimens that we currently have. So if you can identify these people early, you can potentially prevent these devastating problems from occurring.
A new and unique Canadian system that tracks and interprets information on diabetes is expected to do just that. The National Diabetes Surveillance System will finally determine just how many people in Canada have the disease and how to better prevent and manage it. Yvonne Colbert, CBC News, Halifax.
And after the break, another option for diabetics who need daily insulin injections to survive. The promise of insulin pumps when Health Matters continues.